Welcome back to Raptor-One.
Raptor-One, Voyagers of the Stars. Season 2, Chapter 5, Part 2. The Broken Choir. They went to meet the Accord in the posture they had named. And the ship, scarred, insufficient, faithful, carried flame. The thread. Dark running is a different kind of bravery. No glow from the panels, but the barest ember, no chatter from the receivers, no hums above what the ship needs to keep from freezing. Raptor-One slid on the Accord's thread the way a leaf rides a current, guided without rudder, teeth buzzing with a pressure that didn't come from engines. Varric's heat sail drifted astern like a shed skin. The ship wore its chill the way old soldiers wear medals, uncomfortable but honest. "Feel that curve?" Ira whispered, eyes closed, fingers resting light on the NAV as if it were a pulse. "Left, then rise a hair. There's a fold above us. They're tucking us under it." Saran didn't touch the yoke. The Accord's pull handled that. They watched the dark with their hands flat on their knees and let leadership look like stillness. The thread narrowed, tightened, then eased. Ahead, the nebula parted into a seam of near black. The instruments showed nothing. The eye found less. "Pocket," Chiron said, voice a notch above breath. "Not silence. Room." They crossed the seam and Raptor-One side, a sound no system owned, like a ship stepping from wind into lee. The gate. It rose from the dark like a cut made in glass and left unpolished. A ring of crystal spars, broken and bound together with cable and plating from a dozen dead ships. No lights. You saw it by the way stardust refused to pass through the hole at its center. At a breath from the ring, a tone tapped the hull. Tessa's shard answered with the same interval the sigil had taught them. "Show us you are you," the tone said without words. Chiron bared his wrists to the glass and spoke the code the Accord had said in their terms. 7. Dim, peacebound, blind, kept thing, measure, room. The ring's arms stirred, not with motors but with memory, and a corridor unfurled, panels unfolding like the leaves of a book that had been closed too long. It did not let them see where it led. It did not make room for doubt to turn back. "Bring 7, Saran said quietly, and the crew rose. Darrow lifted his rifle with the rope snug. He checked the knot, then deliberately didn't check it again. Cyrus set his drone into its cradle and skimmed a finger over the dark lens. Varric flexed his ruined arm and didn't apologize to it. Ira tucked her sketchbook into her jacket. Chiron touched the scrap of hull stencil folded over his heart. Tessa closed her hand around the shard and felt it steady. Saran led them down. The measure. The corridor was not a hallway, so much as an old instrument repurposed. Ribs of crystal, filaments strung between them. The air tuned to a note that made you straighten your spine without being told. The smell of it was metal and clean dust, with a memory of rain that could only have come from someone's wish. They reached a threshold where the ribs narrowed into a throat of lattice. Here the tone changed. 2 figures stepped from shadow, a man and a woman, or a woman and a man, or simply 2 people whose faces carried the fatigue of choices made with not enough time. They wore no insignia. Around their throats lay thin bands of crystal, dull until they breathed. Then the bands warmed like coals. "Median," Darrow murmured under his breath, as if naming a star you'd navigated by before it exploded. The taller of the 2 inclined their head. The voice that followed was plain as bread. "We measure to keep, not to reject. Step forward when you choose, with what you kept." Saran did not look to the others for assent. They stepped first. "Saran, what do you keep?" The median asked. Choice, Saran said. No ornament. Show it. Saran placed both hands, palms down, on the lattice. It hummed in the bones of their arms and asked a question without words. Are you choosing now? Or are you repeating something you were taught to perform? They did not think of the chair. They thought of the corridor through the choir, of not letting Tessa run toward the breaking, of telling Cyrus no and meaning it in a way that kept him. The hum tilted, not in approval so much as recognition. The band at the median's throat glowed. Kept, they said softly. Next. Tessa. Tessa stepped forward. The lattice brightened at her nearness, as if relieved to be used. What do you keep? Voices, she said, though her own trembled. Show it. She pressed the shard against the ribs and laid her other palm beside it. Her hum was small, sturdy. The lattice answered with a dozen faint, faltering notes, the after voices of those who had left traces here before. Tessa did not try to lift them or lead them. She made room. The lattice warmed under her hand. Kept, the second median murmured. Their eyes softened as if a hook in their chest had loosened. Darrow. Darrow took the throat like a post takes weather. He kept his rifle cradled low with the peace binding visible. What do you keep? Names, he said. They make me true. Show it. He spoke 5, no more. The lattice recorded nothing of the syllables. It felt instead for the way the mouth shapes love when it refuses to let grief tidy it. A low resonance spread through the ribs, a weight that felt like a hand on a shoulder. Kept, the tall median said. Something in their jaw unclenched. Ira. Ira came with her sketchbook tucked under her arm, like a talisman a child refuses to set down. Her cheeks were still salt bright. What do you keep? Wonder, she said, not as denial, as defiance. Show it. She did not sing. She opened the book and laid a page against the lattice. Not a tower falling, not an autumn beam, but 5 linked hands at the center of a storm. The crystal did not recognize ink, but it recognized the posture of the hand that had drawn it. A thin, high overtone shimmered and held. Kept, the median breathed. Their eyes found Saran's for a heartbeat and said, This is why you bring 7, not 1. Chiron. Chiron stepped up with nothing in his hands but the folded scrap of metal over his heart. What do you keep? The question, he said, dry-mouthed. I let it hurt me before I let it lie to me. Show it. He placed the scrap on the ribs. The lattice thrummed, expecting confession, prepared for performance. Chiron did not give it either. He told the truth he had written and rewritten until it felt like a bone set right. The commands he'd carried. The room he had left when the orders asked him to become an angle in someone else's certainty. The names he had given up to protect. The one time he had not, and how that still kept him from sleeping. The lattice vibrated in a pattern that was not harmonious and did not apologize for it. Kept, the second median said after a long breath. Questions are doors. We prefer them to walls. Cyrus. Cyrus looked smaller without his lens humming around him. He raised his hands like a busker showing his palms to a new crowd. No patter came. What do you keep? Audience, he said, with a wince of humor at his own expense, even if it's only the 6 of them. Show it. He didn't reach for the drone. He turned, back against the lattice, and met each of the crew's eyes in turn as if he were counting them in, and the count mattered more than being seen. I am here when you look, he said. And when you don't, I am still here. The lattice vibrated, not with applause, not with a crowd's roar, but with something more useful, recognition between fewer than 10 people that might hold when things broke. Kept, the median said, and their mouth almost smiled. Varric. Varric came last because he wanted to come last, and because no one pushed him earlier. His ruined arm made a small complaint as he lifted it to the ribs. What do you keep? Spite, he said, and let them have the word. And craft. Show it. He laid his forearm across the lattice and didn't flinch when the crystal read the harmonics of what the Autom had written in him. The band at the median's throat flared, then steadied. Pain sharpened at the base of his skull like a remembered drill. He ground his teeth and hummed low and ugly until the remembered pain had to find a different route. Chain? The tall median asked, not accusatory. Is their chain still singing? Plenty, Varric said. Broken or breaking. None I'm hiding. The lattice thrummed once like a foundry hammer. Kept, the second median said, softer than any of the others. And welcome. The ribs cooled. The medians stepped back together and inclined their heads. 7, the tall one said. Dim, peacebound. Blind lens. Kept things shown. Measure suffered. Room agreed. They glanced toward the darkness beyond. Come in. The hall. The pocket's heart was not a hall you build when you expect company. It was the room you make when you cannot live outside. A long chamber bored into a knotted mass of crystal and hull plating. The walls a mosaic of choir fragments and ship tags. Some shards bore names. Most bore scratches where names had been, scraped away by someone who decided memory without attribution was safer. There were benches, yes, and tables, and lamps simmering on low, colored by filters cobbled from stained panels. But the first thing the hall offered was not furniture. It was a rhythm, work beats, rest beats, listening beats. People moved by them without a drum to point at. The room made its own time. They came forward in ones and twos. No one rushed. You could tell a lot about a people by how they let greetings take the space they needed. A tall person with a shaved head and an old scar at the jaw. A small elder with palms like worn leather. A pair of youths with matching tools tucked into their belts like cousins' keepsakes. Bands lay at their throats like the medians, not bright, not dead. No names offered. Hands to heart, then outward. You are seen. We will not hold your name until you give it. Welcome, said the tall one who came first. Their voice could have cut fabric without raising it. You have already stood with us where we broke. We do not test posture twice in a day. Saran inclined their head. We brought what we promised. We saw, the elder said. Their eyes found Darrow's peace binding, Varric's arm, Cyrus's quiet lens. We kept our terms, so did you. They gestured to a table whose surface was a slab of crystal turned flat by decades of use. 7 bowls sat there, filled with water that held a faint tone when you looked away from it. Drink, the elder said. Not hospitality. Tuning. It will make our room easier to bear. Tessa lifted a bowl first and smelled winter. The water rang against her teeth in a way that made her shoulders drop a finger's breadth. Varric drank and grimaced, then blinked, surprised, as static he had stopped noticing faded to the corners of his hearing. Chiron's bowl made his tongue taste tin. He swallowed anyway and felt a small corner of his mind unclench. Warning, said the shaved-headed one, and nodded at a wall where phrases had been cut into a plate with a dull knife. No names until offered. No lights brighter than the band. No questions you are not ready to answer yourself. No broadcast. Leave room. Cyrus read them aloud without the voice he used for a crowd. Fair, he said, and put his palm on the drone as if to introduce it by touch alone. This is blind. It will stay that way. We will trust and check, the tall one said, with a frankness that felt like clean air. You will do the same. A soft tone brushed the hall, and the bands at several throats warmed. The medians who had measured them stepped in and took their places along one wall. The elder looked to Saran. We lost our choir, they said. We built a chord to be what remains when harmony is impossible. If you came to be saved, we will fail you. If you came to stand, we will be with you until we cannot. Saran let the words land the way you let truth land, without flinching from the bruise. We came to stand, they said, and to learn how you kept standing when the sky turned red. Then sit, the elder said, and for the first time there was the smallest lift at the corner of their mouth. We have ugly knots to teach, and paths through noise, and a list of places where the Autom think they have erased us and have not. Darrow's fingers twitched toward his rope. Varric's mouth did the almost smile again. Ira's hand found her pencil by reflex. Tessa's shoulders eased like a cord resolving. Chiron's hood tipped back a fraction. Cyrus set the drone down as if it were a cup at someone else's table and took a chair with his hands, not his persona. The hall was refuge, yes, but its walls were mosaic for a reason. Nothing here matched. Everything here held. Above them, faint and patient, a sigil hovered only when you looked away, its circle incomplete by a finger's width. Room. Work beats. The accord taught like people who had run out of time a long while ago and learned to make more with their hands. No lectures, no banners. Tasks arranged themselves into beats. Tie, test, untie. Cut, fold, cool. Hum, cancel, hold. Between each beat, the room breathed together and someone said, again, without edge. Saran watched the rhythm take hold. Leadership here was a tool you set down where anyone could reach it. Ugly knots. Darrow found himself at a table whose surface had been chewed down to satin by 1,000 drills. Across from him sat a woman with scarred knuckles and the patient eyes of someone who had put too many shoulders back into sockets. Knots, she said. The kind you hate. The kind that save lives. Peace binding's the simple one. We'll start where it hurts. He presented the rifle as if it were a confession. She nodded at the cord. Figure 8 is good to show, she said, bad under panic. Panic bites this seam. She broke it open with 2 fingers faster than Darrow could blink. This instead. She looped, turned, and tucked, a small, merciless weave. It looks careless. It is not. You can cut it in one motion if you must break peace. But if your hand tries to yank, it tells the truth about you to anyone watching. He mirrored her, muscle memory fighting pride. When his fingers stumbled, she tapped the back of his hand, not to correct, just to remind it he had won. What's it called? He asked. She looked at his work, approved. We don't name knots that keep us honest, she said. We name the people who taught us to tie them. I'm Katrin. Darrow, he said. Good, Katrin said, and pulled a loop across his knuckles. Now the carry sling you can cut clean if the ceiling falls. They made and unmade knots until his fingers knew them without his attention. It was a humiliation he trusted. When Tessa drifted by, Darrow held out the sling. If I go down, he said, pull here. It'll let go without breaking your shoulder. She threaded the loop over her wrist, measured the weight he would become, and nodded. I'll pull, she said. Only if you say. Or if you don't, he said, and that, too, was a kind of peace binding. Heat and drift. Varric's classroom was a bench sunk under a forest of fins. The Accord's engineers had built a heat shedder that looked like a bird exploded in the middle of molting. Feathers of black radiator, bones of old struts, pinions made from the ribs of a choir tower. A kid with a fresh welding scar across one eyebrow wiped a spanner on their sleeve and grinned at him. "You're the one who burned your arm feeding a vein," they said, like a compliment. "Varric," he replied. "You?" "Hell," they said. "Show me your sail." He did. The foldable decoy he'd slapped together in a day of panic and cleverness. Pell peered, tongue caught between their teeth, then began to tug at seams, not unkindly, pointing where heat would pool, where a fin would sing, where a fold would slap itself raw. "Drift corridors," Pell said, sketching with the spanner on the table as if it could leave lines in the air. "Not lanes. Lanes get named, then killed. Corridors are habits the dark has. We hide in those. Here, here, here. You dump heat in the sail, cut it loose along the habit, and let it pretend to be your heartbeat after you've left your body." Varric snorted. "We're building corpses." "We're building alibis," Pell said. "Corpses burn. Alibis cool." They showed him the hinge he'd never learned to trust. The way a borrowed fin could flex not to make less heat, but to make it arrive late. He loved the ugliness of it, the honesty of what it admitted. We cannot outshine. We can only outlast. By the end, his ruined arm ached like a tooth, and his mouth had done that almost smile 3 times, which counted as laughter in languages where no one had time for jokes. "Keep spite," Pell said cheerfully, wiping radiator grease onto his sleeve as if it belonged there. "Spite keeps systems alive. Love cools them after." Counterharmonics. On a raised platform the Accord had not bothered to pretty. 2 medians stood with Tessa and Ira between them. Crystal ribs formed a shallow bowl under their feet. The air tasted of iron filings and rain on hot stone. "Autumn's certainty is a straight line," the first median said. "We don't try to bend it. We let it pass through a room we've prepared and make it weaken itself." "How?" Ira asked, breath already attuned. "By not being where it expects us to be," the second median said, mouth wry, "but also with math." They struck a note that wasn't sweet. It was a clashing interval, like 2 truths held in the same mouth. Tessa flinched, then steadied. Her shard found the closest safe thread and sat there. "We call it cross-grit," the first median said. "You hum under the doctrine at a half-breath offset. You are not loud. You are stubborn. You never meet its peak head-on. You meet the valley, press, release, press. It makes the Autumn's certainty work to keep itself standing. It tires. We don't, because stubborn is what we have." Ira's eyes brightened. "We shade the line," she said. "We make it wobble." "Exactly," the second median said. "Don't try to erase it. Let it find itself, but make it late to its own conclusion." They practiced until late felt like a lever they could throw with their throats. Tessa learned how not to be beautiful. Ira learned how not to soar. The median smiled like carpenters watching a beam seat into a notch with one clean knock. Posture and story. Chiron and Cyrus ended up at the same wall without meaning to. The wall wore rules carved by hand, and a tattered panel of ship tag letters riveted together into a prayer. Leave room. A square-shouldered Accord organizer. No band. No rank. Only a face like honest weather. Laid 3 clay tokens on the table. Each bore a sigil. A circle with a cut. A lens with a line through it. A knot. "These are not medals," they said. "They are reminders. When you cross a threshold you do not wish to cross, you hold one. See if you can put it down before it wears smooth." Cyrus picked up the lens, turned it until the line across it seemed almost like a smile. "You're serious about the blind," he said, not arguing, just making the shape of the cost. The organizer nodded. "We are alive because our stories travel more slowly than our ships. We don't ask for silence. We ask for delay. Tell what you saw of us only after we can move. Tell what you felt of us when telling it helps people stand." Cyrus looked at Chiron. "He's going to quote you back to me in different clothes." "I would never," Chiron said dryly. Then, to the organizer, "Part of us is a signal, whether we mean it or not. His audience is a tide. Your rooms are a harbor. We will not open a floodgate here." The organizer held Chiron's gaze for 3 beats, then placed a 4th token, a blank clay disc, on the table between them. "For when you want to speak and shouldn't," they said. "Put your hand on this instead." Cyrus laughed, soft, grateful. "My fans will think I'm learning to meditate." "You're learning to count," Chiron said. "Which is worse?" They stood there together a moment longer, letting the lesson set like a bone. Lines on the table. In the second watch, with bowls of tuning water sweating rings onto the crystal slab, the Accord brought the first hard ask. A map unfolded without a projector, just pieces of hull and shard laid in relations that made sense if you'd lived there long enough. A thin copper wire ran through them like the careless path of a river. The tall median set a small block along the wire and let everyone feel the room lean toward it. "Line Sparrow," they said. "A run of 4 little ships ferrying people out of the half-burnt shells where the Autom don't think anyone bothers breathing. We keep them dark. We keep them late. They still get harried." Pell tapped a plate with a fingernail. "They're running hot this cycle," they said. One of the Sparrow hulls picked up a crack in a radiator. "They'll read like a candle to anything that glances." Varric's shoulders went tight. "You want to sail?" he said. "A decoy heartbeat. You want us to drag and drop so they live." "We want you to lay a corpse," the organizer said, plain. "You know how now." "That's not the hard ask," Chiron said, already hearing the part hidden under the part. "What's the line you're not quite naming?" The tall median slid a finger along the copper wire until it kinked around a shard fragment shaped like a broken tooth. "Here," they said, "an old Concorde relay spire. We use it as cover when we must. It's blind now. It will wake if it feels power. The Autom sweep it to brag. They're due in 18 hours. If they find you, you do not lead them to our pocket. You lead them to the spire and make them believe that's all that's here." Darrow's jaw worked. A decoy's one thing. Being chased is another. "We don't want you chased," the elder said, not unkind. "We want your shape in their mind to be simple. You fought us at the node. You ran. You hide in old Concorde trash. Let that be the story they tell about you when you are out of sight." Cyrus's mouth tightened. If they write that story, billions who believe in us will hear it. "Then teach them to want better stories than the Autom tell," the elder said. It wasn't a rebuke. It was an assignment. Ira closed her eyes, felt threads. "We can do it," she said. "If the constellation doesn't shift. If the corridor holds." Saran's gaze circled the faces, Accord and crew. "We do it," they said, then added the part that would cost. "And the radiant thread we were hunting waits." The room changed temperature by a breath. Tessa's head came up. "Waits?" "Not erased," Saran said. "Delayed. We have 7 and a ship. The Accord has a line full of people who run out of breath if we take too long to help them past a sweep." Tessa's shard warmed and cooled as if a hand had pressed there and left. She swallowed, throat bright with unsung notes. "Okay," she said. "It sounded like I will not like this, and I will stand anyway." Kyra nodded once, hard. We can afford to be patient with Radiance. The gate will not. People first. Varric flicked his ruined arm with 2 fingers. My sail's yours, he told Pell. You ride with me, kid. If it burns wrong, you're the one I want yelling in my ear. Pell grinned, savage and pleased. Deal. Darrow cut the peace-binding loop on his rifle and retied it, ugly and sure. If the sweep bites, he said, we don't bite back unless we must. Must will come, Cotran said grimly. Make it tell the truth about you when it does. Cyrus turned the blind drone so it faced the wall of rules. All right, he murmured to it. You get to be a listener. The elder let the murmurs fall still. One more thing, they said, and set a small, dull band on the table. It looked like the median's throat bands, but thinner, chipped. We call it a quiet mark, they said. It stays cold unless we sing it warm. It will not broadcast. It does not make you glow. But in a room where we are, it tells us you are who you were when we measured you. You can remove it. You should remove it if you must vanish. But if you carry it when you come and go, you do not have to prove yourselves each time to every frightened hand at every door. The band sat between them like a harmless ring and a collar at once. Chiron's voice came very soft. It's a tether. It's permission to walk in kitchens without knives raised first, the elder said. Nothing more, nothing less. The disagreement slid into the room on quiet feet. Cyrus spoke first, because he was used to speaking first. If someone sees us with that. They won't, Chiron cut in. Not unless they measure like this. But if the Autom ever learn the interval. They'll counterfeit it, Varric finished. Or make us wear it while they erase a room. Tessa looked stricken, then angry. Don't make us choose between being let in and being used against you. We are not making you, the tall median said. We are telling you the cost and the change it buys. You can say no. You can say not yet. We will open the door again next time slower. That's all. Ira touched the band with one fingertip, not claiming it. If I wore it, she said, I would want it to remind me of obligation, not privilege. That is the proper use of a key, the elder said. They let the silence breathe. Saran looked at their crew and found that each face already carried the version of yes or no it could live with. They looked back at the elder. We will take one, Saran said. Not 7. We'll rotate it among us until we know what it feels like to be welcomed by it and looked for by it. If it becomes a collar, we will put it down. If it stays a key, we will ask for more. The Accord considered, then nodded. Good, the organizer said, satisfied. We prefer people who test doors. Saran turned to the crew. I'll carry it first, they said. No, Tessa said, surprising herself with the shape of the word. Let me. Saran blinked. Why? Because I am the one who will be recognized by it most often, Tessa said, hand firm over the shard at her breast. Because I ask rooms to make space for voices. People will come to me faster if they believe you have allowed me through. Chiron's mouth tilted. Also because you are the least likely to forget it's a key. And the most likely to set it down if it ever warms wrong, Varric added. Saran weighed all of that and nodded. Tessa carries. Tessa lifted the band. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't pretty. She set it around her throat and felt nothing, which was exactly the point. The elder's eyes softened, the way a person's do when a stranger does something you didn't dare ask of them. Lines you can use. Before the watch turned, the Accord taught them phrases to hand across thresholds that might keep knives sheathed and mouths from lying. Cotran taught Darrow to say, I will leave room for your fear if you leave room for my oath, and to mean both halves. Pell taught Varric to say, I can make you colder without making you safer. Tell me which you need, and to wait for the answer. The Medians taught Tessa and Ira to say, we can make the doctrine late. We cannot make it go away. Will you hold breath with us for 6 counts? And to count out loud. The organizer taught Chiron to say, I will ask questions in the order you name them, and I will stop when you say stop, and to stop. The elder taught Saran to say, I do not ask permission to choose. I ask permission to choose with you, and to hear no as a real word. Cyrus learned to say nothing at all, and to let silence do the work when performance would have ruined it. He hated the taste of it and admitted as much, which was an honest beginning. Departure beat. By the time Raptor-One had been tuned and taught and bound to a task, the hall's lamps were down to coals. The Accord did not hug. They stood with their hands at their throats, bands dull, and looked like people who might outlast seasons. Line Sparrow runs in 14 hours, the tall median said. We'll pull you to the drop. You'll leave the corpse on the habit. If the sweep bites, you tell it a simple story about yourself. You hide an ugly concord. You do not bring it here. We will not, Saran said. The elder looked at Tessa's band and smiled just enough to move the scar at their upper lip. Leave room, they reminded, the way you remind someone to eat, for what you cannot carry today. Tessa touched the band lightly, then the shard. We will. They drank one last bowl of tuning water and let the door remember them as the people who had stood where the choir broke and kept the things they had sworn to keep. The corridor carried them back by the same ribs, the same wish of rain. At the threshold, the medians lifted a palm. The mark will not warm unless we sing it, one said to Tessa. If it warms without us, throw it into the sea. I will, Tessa said, and believed they meant it both literally and for whatever sea she had to make. Raptor-One took them in with the sigh of a house relieved to see its inhabitants come home. The quiet thread waited like a path in new snow. Lessons and lines, Saran said as the doors sealed. We'll live by them until they break. Then we'll fix what we can and name what we can't. Darrow checked the knot on his rifle and didn't untie it. Varric patted the sail cradle like a shoulder he respected. Ira sketched a radiator fin that folded late on purpose and wrote underneath, late can save. Chiron slid the blank clay token into his pocket beside the confession he'd rewritten and felt both weigh the same. Cyrus set the blind drone on the dash and, for once, didn't tell it what it was seeing. Tessa's band lay cold against her skin. It felt less like a circle and more like a promise with an escape route. Together, in the ship's red hush, they breathed in 2 and out 4, counting down to the hour they would go lay a false heartbeat in the dark, so for little ships could keep carrying real ones. Outside, the nebulous habits turned like slow rivers no map could keep up with. Somewhere behind and beneath, the Accord's hull held time for them, not by stopping anything, but by giving it a rhythm. The gate still waited, larger than any room could bear. The radiant thread they had delayed glimmered in the corner of Ira's eye like a star that forgives lateness. They had chosen. They had learned. They had drawn lines they could use. The rest would be work. H2. The habit of the dark. They marked the hours the way the Accord had taught them, by work beats rather than clocks. Varric and Pell knelt under the belly of Raptor-One, backs to each other like surgeons at a hard angle. The decoy, Varric's heat-shed sail, slept in its cradle, a stack of black fins folded into a parcel the size of a coffin. Pell's spanner ticked against bolts in a syncopation that matched the ship's slow pulse. Flex joint here, Pell said, tapping a hinge that looked too thin to matter. If the fin sings, the Autom get curious. We want board. I can do board, Varric muttered, tightening a bracket until the metal squealed and then sighed. He ran his good hand along the fin's edge, felt for burrs, found one, kissed it with a file. Late heat, ugly curve, a little rattle that reads like scrap. The Autom will write this off as salvage with a fever. Perfect, Pell said, grinning. Let's go be trash. Topside, Iris stood with her palms resting on the NAV glass. The habit corridor, what the Accord called the dark's own tendencies, ran like a barely visible river through the nebula's clot. She traced its invisible banks with 2 fingers, learning the relief by touch. Current rises here, she murmured, half to herself, half to the ship. A notch to the right. The sail goes in, we peel off under it. No thrust, drift only. Chiron listened to nothing. He had killed the external receivers 2 watches ago and kept his hands folded so the habit of reaching would not betray him. Empty channels hissed very softly in his skull. He counted the hiss until it stopped feeling like absence and started feeling like quiet. Tessa moved down the central corridor with her shard tucked at her collarbone and the thin Accord band cold at her throat. She hummed the most ordinary phrases she knew. No heroic arcs, no pretty corners, so that if anyone woke in the dark, a human sound would be waiting to prove the room still existed. Cyrus walked with her for a stretch, hands in pockets, drone blind and riding his shoulder like a small patient animal. How do you stand the not talking? He asked, half teasing, half prayer. I'm talking, she said, and let the hum lift a fraction. Just not to the galaxy. He nodded and did not ask if that was the same. Darrow sat cross-legged by the forward hatch with Cotrin's knot around his rifle. He tied and untied it until his fingers stopped doing the old pattern and did the ugly one without thinking. Each time he finished, he looked to Saran. Each time, they only nodded. Someone's job was to name readiness. Today, it wasn't his. Saran stood the way they had learned to stand in rooms that were not theirs, hands open, attention narrow. The choice sat in their hollow like a weight that fit the shape. On my word, they said at last, and the ship seemed to lean toward the habit. H0, the false heart. The cradle doors irised open with a whisper, and Varric's sail slid out on a guide rail. Pell's hand hovered beneath it, not touching, ready to steady anyway. The black fins breathed once in vacuum, a ripple through the stack, and then unfolded in slow, reluctant grace. A ragged hemisphere formed, edges slightly misaligned by design. Heat to decoy in 3, Varric said, breath steady in his mic too. 1. He eased the valve. Warmth bled from Raptor-One's core into the sail, not a burn, a fever. The fins darkened by a shade only an Autom would notice. A low burr rolled through the cradle as the hinges settled into the wrong posture on purpose. Pell watched the readouts and then stopped watching and listened to it like a machine whisperer listens to a patient. Good, they said. It sounds tired. Like me, Varric said. Despite himself, his mouth did that near smile. Release, Saran said, voice quiet and level. Varric thumbed the cutter. A cable sighed and parted. The sail drifted, not away from Raptor-One so much as out of meaning. Ira let the habit's current take it. It slid into the corridor like a leaf into gutter water, warm enough to matter, cold enough to be boring. A corpse with a pulse. Peel, Saran said. Ira rolled her wrists a degree. Raptor-One exhaled in a direction only physics would have approved, and then even physics would have had to look twice. The ship slid sideways into the shadow of the decoy's wake, and then under it. Engines slept. The hull made the sound a house makes when you put your ear to the pantry door. Tessa's hum slid lower, matching the ship's bones. Cyrus matched her without calling it music. Chiron kept his hands folded. Darrow did not check his knot. The sweep. At first nothing changed. The dark wears its own stillness for so long that you learn not to wish for thunder. Then a pressure appeared at the edge of perception, not a touch, but a certainty that wanted to be one. Ira's shoulders went tight. "They're coming," she whispered, as if the Autom could hear courtesy. Red geometry did not bloom, it arrived. A trio of scout arcs slid along the habit the way knives slide along a whetstone, seeking edge. Behind them, something heavier lurked. Not a hunter class, not here. A sweep barge, its hull shaped to herd rather than kill, doctrine engraved in its voice like a law. Identify. Halt. Surrender. Order is fact. The sail warmed imperceptibly as the barge's passive arrays tasted the corridor. The little scouts flared curiosity and then tamped it down. A fever dream of a ship, radiating heat in the wrong places, drifting like salvage. Their doctrine rippled. Classify. Derelict. One scout peeled off to nose the decoy. The burr in the hinges sang faintly. Pell held their breath. Varric did not. "Bored," Varric said, as if telling a story bedside. "Be bored, you perfect little bastard." The scout's red line licked the fin and slid away. Classified junk. The trio reformed and angled toward the Concorde relay spire Ira had marked. A refrigerator-white tooth thrust from the nebula's throat, long dead and useful as alibi. "Stay late," Tessa whispered, taking the cross-grit the medians had taught and laying it under the doctrine in a half-count offset. Her voice did not fight the Autom's demand. It asked it to wait for itself. Ira layered a second low note, off to the side, a shading rather than a shove. Chiron did not jam. He did not send. He allowed his muscles to want to, and then did nothing, and in the doing nothing made space for the Autom to make their own mistake. The barge's doctrine pressed again, closer, colder. Identify. Halt. Surrender. The decoy's heat wobbled appropriately. Raptor-One did not. The sweep passed so near the hull that Darrow imagined he could hear the paint complain. His fingers twitched toward the knot. He didn't touch it. Saran lifted a single finger and lowered it again. Not yet. The scouts paused at the spire. One pinged it. The ancient metal thunked in a way only metallurgy in a grudge can thunk. The barge's doctrine ticked through a dozen simple stories and chose one. Concorde remnant. Salvage. Noise. And then the heavier thing behind them turned its head. The bite. It had the silhouette of a hunter seen through sleep. Less blade, more block, a keeper. Not as fast, not as sharp, designed to set its geometry over a place and make that place behave. The keeper's voice did not repeat itself because it never thought it had to say anything twice. Deviation. A red sheet washed across the corridor, not a beam, but a curtain of measurement. It would taste heat, inertia, the shape a ship makes in a field when it pretends to be absent. The decoy rang. Late. Ugly. Perfect. The curtain flowed on and recoiled. Not much. Just enough to prove that Raptor-One existed where nothing should. Crossgrit, Saran said, and the order was a prayer. Tessa nudged her hum a half-breath off-center, the way a hand skids a glass across a table that's not quite level. Ira found the dip in the keeper's sweep where readings lagged their own logic and sat the ship in it. Chiron exhaled the question he had been holding. What shape do you expect? And supplied the wrong answer on purpose, not as signal, but as posture. The curtain pressed again. The hull ticked. Cyrus closed his eyes, and counted 1, 2, 3, 4 with his tongue against his teeth. Darrow's breath matched him without knowing it. Bored, Varric muttered. Be so bored you yawn. Pell's hand hovered under a dial that would do nothing but let them feel like they could help. Please, they said to no one. The keeper found the sail again. It decided it had found cause. It sent a small beam, not to cut, to label. The fin flashed, took on the mark, derelict, TUG. The curtain rolled back to the spire and wrote a note to itself, scan complete. The barge resumed its trudge. Hold, Saran said, because leaving early writes a new story in a watcher's mind. They held. 3 counts. 6. 10. The pressure eased. Cyrus opened his eyes and let out a shaky breath and did not make a joke about ratings. Corridors clear, Ira whispered, voice reedy with the effort of not soaring. We can move. Saran glanced to Darrow. He touched the knot and left it tied. Go, he said, dropping the heart. They waited until the sweep's doctrine sounded like rain behind a door. Then Ira nudged the ship out from under the sail's wake and drifted along the habit's other bank. The decoy continued like a story told for someone else's benefit, slow, a little sad, ultimately unimportant. At the notch Pell had sketched in air with a spanner, Varric blew the last of the heat into the sail. The fins flushed once, like a creature dying in sunlight, and then cooled. The sail kissed the edge of the spire and stuck. A dead tug leaned there for whoever wanted to have found it. Corpse laid, Pell said, pride and a little grief mixed in. Alibi planted, Chiron murmured. Lake can save, Iris said, and wrote it under the motion of her hands. Line Sparrow, Saran said. Where are they? 2 minutes behind the habit, Ira answered, eyes glassing over as she listened to threads. They'll pass under our shadow if we hold. They held, for small signatures slid by, close enough that Tessa's shard warmed in greeting. Cyrus lifted a palm to the dark as if waving at strangers in a theater lobby. Darrow watched them pass as if counting heads in a dream where this time everyone makes it out. The Sparrow ships entered the lee of the spire's lie and faded into the nebula's own boredom. The doctrine did not return. The story we chose. Only when distance felt like something you could set a cup on did Saran allow anyone to speak like it was over. Status, they said. Heat nominal, Varric reported, and flexed his ruined arm like a man checking a tooth. Sail cooling in place like the corpse it wanted to be. Corridor stable, Iris said, shoulders slumping a fraction. We can climb out slow, stay inside habit. No external, Chiron said, a reminder and a vow. Blind lens, Cyrus echoed, tapping the drone. It purred, empty and content. Tessa let her hum resolve, not into triumph, into rest. The band stayed cold, she said softly, thumb brushing the accord mark at her throat. It felt like a hand and not a collar. Darrow frowned down at his rifle for a moment, then tugged the piece binding. He didn't cut it. Next time, if the bite comes early. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. They all nodded anyway. Saran leaned back in the chair and let the weight in their hollow settle without digging in. We told the simple story, they said. We hid an ugly Concord. The Autom will tell that version of us to themselves. And the Sparrow ships will tell another, Iris said, smiling with tired eyes. Good, Chiron said. Let there be more than one truth of us in the world. It keeps gates from closing. Pell sagged against the cradle and grinned up at Varric. You're not awful at this. I am great at being awful, Varric said, To his surprise, laughed once, short and rusty and real. Cyrus rubbed his face and looked out at the nebula. Billions won't hear about this today, he said, not with regret. That's all right. Not all lives are for the stage. Tessa tucked her shard back against her heart. Some are for rooms, she said. Some are for habits. Some are for corridors. Darrow nodded. Some are for getting 4 small ships through a sweep. Saran let silence be the answer for a few breaths. Then, we owe the Accord a report they will not read. They said, and the crew understood. We owe ourselves a meal we will taste and a sleep that may not stick. Radiant thread? Ira asked quietly. Not forgotten, Saran said. Just late. Late can save, Ira repeated, and closed her eyes without sleeping. After. They did the awkward chores, stowing lines, wiping tools, writing down the things they didn't want to forget in case later made them liars. Varric noted how the hinge had sung and which bolt had sighed. Ira traced the habit's curve and shaded the bank where boredom lived. Chiron folded his hands on the blank clay token until it warmed slightly from his skin. Darrow taught Cyrus the panic-breaking knot because one day even a showman might need a rope to tell the truth about his hands. Tessa made tea badly, and no one corrected her. Saran walked the deck and asked each of them, what would make it easier next time? And wrote it down in the list in their head. The nebula went on being itself. Far behind, the sweep wrote a report no one would read. Derelict at Concord SP1 R3. Noise. The keeper ticked a box. Deviation corrected. Somewhere in a pocket with a hull that tuned your breathing, an elder poured water into 7 bowls and set them aside for a day when 7 would come again. The gate still waited, wider and colder than any corridor. The radiant thread still called from the corner of Ira's, I like a promise that forgives lateness if you bring bread when you arrive. Raptor-One warmed by 1 degree and then stopped. The ship didn't purr. She held. They had laid a false heart that beat just long enough to let 4 real ones pass. Sometimes noise is a shout. Sometimes it is the decision to be boring at the exact right time. They would need both. The return. They came back on the Accord's thread with the ship dim and willing, heat sail cradle empty and clean. The pocket took them in like a lee takes a small boat. No fanfare, only the relief of less wind. At the ring, the same tone tapped the hull. Tessa's band stayed cold, her shard answered, and the corridor folded out of shadow. The ribs of crystal hummed the way bones hum when you've climbed a long stair and found a landing. No one spoke until they reached the measure throat. The median stepped forward, bands warm. The taller one put 2 fingers on the lattice and listened without touching the crew. You left a corpse, they said plain. The sweep took the story. Line Sparrow slid through. Pell couldn't help themselves. They looked up from under their welding scar with a grin that lit all the grease. Your sail stuck to the spire like it missed it, they told Varric. If the keeper had a face, it would have yawned. Varric's mouth did that almost smile. Good. We built boredom. Katrin's eyes found Darrow's peace binding. She touched the knot the way a teacher taps a chalkboard. You left it tied. Darrow nodded once. We told the simple version of us, he said. We hid in ugly Concord. The elder who had poured tuning water the first time gave Saran a long look that weighed cost and chose gratitude anyway. We don't praise, they said. We remember. They gestured toward the hall. Come be remembered. Bowls and breathing. 7 bowls waited on the long table, the water singing the faintest interval you could only hear when you didn't try. They drank and felt the ship's fretwork unclench by a line width. No one asked for a play-by-play. Quiet report meant posture, not spectacle. They told it the way mechanics tell each other what a machine did when no one was watching. Ira described the habits bank like a hand reading scars, her voice finding the notch where late becomes safe. Varric drew the hinge in the air and then on a scrap of hull with a grease pencil so anyone could steal it. Let the fin sing wrong, he said. It keeps hunters lazy. Tessa tapped the table with one knuckle as she hummed the cross-grit they'd used under the keeper's sweep, half a breath off. Not pretty, stubborn. Chiron named the places he had done nothing on purpose. The room nodded like carpenters at a straight beam. Darrow, with Katrin's help, tied the panic-breaking sling one-handed, eyes averted, then handed the loop to Cyrus without announcement. Cyrus set the blind drone on the slab and said, "Witness only." No shout. The organizer touched its frame, felt the silence, and set it back like a cup freshly washed. Saran finished, not with flourish, but with the line the crew could hold when fear tries to write them a different story. "We told the Autom we were boring," they said. "We will tell ourselves we were not." A small, real smile moved the elder's scar. "Good," they said. "Both are true enough to be useful." Craft for craft. The Accord traded tools the way old kitchens trade recipes. Over elbows and laughter kept small to spare the lamps. Pell gave Varric a thin packet of folded diagrams. Late-fold radiator patterns tagged Sable 3, and in the margin, bend for delay, not denial. Varric left behind his hinge trick, and the cable cut that parts with a sigh instead of a bang. "For when you want to look tired, not wounded," he said. Katrin taught Darrow a second ugly knot for doors you must hold closed without hands, and took from Darrow a soldier's phrase he'd brought from planets with too much market and not enough peace. "I will leave room for your fear if you leave room for my oath." The medians gave Tessa and Ira a pair of counterharmonic sequences for keeper curtains, variations in minor keys that make certainty late without breaking ribs. Chiron offered a deadman trick of paper and springs he and Cyrus had sketched. A time-released canister and unpowered ship can kick toward friendlier lanes. "No broadcast," he said, "just a drift that happens to be red." The organizer's eyes warmed. "We like lies that don't hum." Last, the elder slid a scuffed data wafer across the slab. It was not powered. It did not glow. Someone had etched coordinates on one side by hand with a pen. "Habit map," they said. "We call this corridor Gray River. It changes faster than we can draw it. This is what it wanted last month. It may want something entirely different by morning. Don't trust it. Respect it." Ira touched the scratches with 2 fingers, as if they were braille. "Thank you," she whispered, and the wafer took on more weight for having been given with doubt instead of certainty. Rumor from the edge. When the bowls were empty and the doors were closed and the band lamps turned down to apology, the tall median placed a dull shard on the table between them. It was black as a frozen pond before dawn. "This isn't craft," they said. "This is rumor big enough to count as weather." The hall breathed. Even those who had been pretending to busy their hands looked up. 2 watches ago, the median continued. "A listening net we do not admit we keep felt a bloom in the outer currents. Not a note, not a keeper. Something that unfurled and then folded itself away. For 13 minutes and a handful of breaths, an arc of space near the Velt drift went quiet. Not our kind. The Autom's kind. Radios went to sleep. Choir shards and pockets felt nothing. The Constellation sounded as if cloth had been thrown over it." Tessa's fingers tightened around her own shard until the edges bit. "A test," she said. The words hurt coming out. "A piece of the gate." "Not the gate proper," the elder said. A tooth. Enough to prove it can bite. Ira's eyes went distant, the way they do when a thread hums in your bones. Where? The organizer laid a finger on the map of Hull and Shard. Drift coordinates put the bloom near nearest 3, a cold system. The third world is water-caught in long winter. Ice a kilometer down in places. The Autom tagged it unimportant last century. That makes it useful now. Tessa looked up, breath hitching. I've dreamed that name, she said, surprised at herself. Not the syllables. The weight. A song that doesn't carry through air, but through ice. Chiron's mouth thinned. If the Autom tested near there, they'll seed the ice with their listening thorns. He nodded towards Tessa's band. Rooms will close without knowing why. Varric drummed 2 fingers on the table. Under ice is good for us, he said. Heat is misdirection. Sound travels. Ugly holds. Darrow frowned. Under ice is bad for rifles. Katrin touched his forearm. Then you learn knots that pull people out of cold, she said. We'll teach you those before you go. Cyrus kept his hand on the blind drone as if calming it. My audience won't hear about this until we're back, he said, quieter than he'd meant to sound. But when they do, I'll ask for boots, not cheers. The elder's gaze moved across the 7 and settled on Saran. We cannot escort, they said, not apologizing. Thorns will taste us easier than you. But we can open a door onto the first part of your path and make the Autom late to notice you went through it. Saran let the chairs wait in their hollow settle. The choice already had their shape. We'll take the door, they said. And the delay. The tall median turned the black shard in their fingers until its edge caught no light at all. Find what sings under nearest 3, they said. If the radiant lies there, kindle it if you can. If you can't, don't break your choir for a candle. Leave room. Tessa breathed in and out. We will. A mark for the road. Before they left the hall, the elder set a small pouch on the slab and slid it toward Tessa. Inside lay 3 more quiet bands like the one at her throat, each chipped in a different place. We said 1, the elder reminded. We are not revising our terms. But rooms have memories that are different from rules. If you find a door that half remembers you and will not open, these can help the memory along. Chiron lifted 1 band. Wait it. Keys, he said. Not collars. Until they aren't, the tall median agreed. Throw them into the sea if they warm wrong. Varric's grin was all metal. We're getting good at throwing things into seas. Bring 7, the organizer said, as if blessing. Each time. Or bring none, and bring no apology. They clasped wrists the way people who spend their lives in narrow places do. Brief, honest. No names given. No promises not already paid for. Leaving the pocket. The corridor let them go with the same plain grace it had used to take them in. The ring folded shut, a cutting glass that healed without pretending it had never been made. On the ship, lights rose enough to see one another's faces without waking anything outside. Iris set the wafer, Gray River's last month, into a pocket no screen could find. Varric hung a radiator fin model by the cradle as if it were a charm. Darrow tied Katrin's door-hold knot around a pipe and left it there to teach his hands as he walked past. Chiron tucked the blank clay token deeper in his jacket and felt steadier for the weight. Cyrus pressed his forehead to the drone and breathed until the urge to talk like a crowd looked like something he could choose or not choose. Tessa touched the cool band at her throat and the warm shard at her chest, and said a small word that could have been thanks or could have been a promise. Saran stood at the yoke and didn't touch it yet. We owe them nothing except the truth of what we'll do next, they said. Say it. Ira, we go to nearest 3. We listen before we move. Varric, We rig heat to lie and sound to tell the truth. Darrow. We hold the line and keep our mouths small. Chiron. We do not jam. We make their certainty late. Cyrus. We bring witness and no shout. Tessa. We keep voices, even the ones that slow us. Saran. We choose together, even when it's ugly. The ship hummed like a room that approves of the furniture you've moved. Plot the first leg, Saran said, and at last put their hands on the yoke, not to force it, but to agree with it. Ira traced a path that began with an accord door and ended with white weather. The habit of the dark leaned their way. Behind them, the Accord's hull sank back into its work beats. Tie, test, untie. Ahead, a winter world waited, and under it, if rumor was a kind of truth, something that sang up through a kilometer of cold. Radiant, or trap, or both, Saran thought, and did not look away.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to be notified about upcoming releases to the Raptor-One series, please subscribe. This has been a Bad Karma Drone production.